Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the Sales Career Podcast. Today is I would say, special episode for myself because it's the first time that I'm speaking to someone from Australia. So, with that being said, hi, Chris.
G'day everyone. Thanks for having me, Tyrone.
We already had a quick chat. It's like 8 a.m. in the morning for me and 6 p.m. for Chris. So completely different blood sugar, as Chris just called it. But we would try to make sure that we have the same energy level today when we record. So, Chris, before we give it a go, let's do the time travel. Which advice would you give your younger self when you started your career?
Yeah, great question, Tyrone. I really enjoyed thinking about this because it's not something I've ever been asked before. But basically, there'd be four key things that I would tell myself. Firstly, double down on your values. And what I mean by that is make sure you're grounded by having a good sense of yourself and what you stand for. Value your relationships by building a strong network. Thirdly, be kind to yourself by investing more time into your health, family, friends, and education. And then finally, keep exploring and always enjoy the journey.
Okay, that sounds like you really sat down and thought about your values. Can you tell me where this is coming from? Because I think this is not something that typically someone would do when they work in sales or something, right? Sit down and write down their personal values. So where's this coming from?
Yeah, I think for myself is particularly last year in 2022, there was a lot of change that came through my personal life and juggling, a newborn, that my second child, my daughter was born last year, and making sure that you had enough time, being the other side of the world, in Australia, my family's all in the UK. So we actually relocated to United Kingdom for 3 months, spent time with my brother, my mum, and then also got to see my dad on the way back. So I think um, the main reason for that was definitely the birth of my daughter, and making sure that sometimes it's work is really important, and yes, closing that deal and make sure you hit your numbers, it's all very important, but just making sure that you really truly understand who yourself is and having a good sense of where your values are, because I definitely think the world has become an incredibly noisy place, and you just got to stay strong to that, so and stick to your principles, so 100%. Yeah.
Great. I really love that. Awesome. Then we are already right into your personal life. So let's step one by let's step one step back and talk about who you are actually. So would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi, Chris Wigan. So I have a background with high growth B2B business software. Very much been a growth professional with extensive SaaS experience over the last 12 plus years. I'm originally from the UK, now based here in Sydney, Australia. And a big part of my value is basically being passionate about understanding one, my customers, problem solving and connecting, and basically using software to underpin and solve these business challenges. So, I've been an SDR all the way through up to a CRO, and I've experienced the whole full life cycle. My first job was originally in sales as my first corporate role, and absolutely loved the journey all the way to my current role now. So.
Great. I love that. Why did you actually relocate from UK to Australia?
Believe it or not, I had an opportunity to play some cricket back in 2010 in Australia, and I was meant to be here for 6 months, and I enjoyed the cold beers in the hot sunshine, and the weather was too kind to me during that period, so I couldn't leave, to be honest.
Uh, Sounds good. This sounds like a real good reason to stay somewhere. The weather and the beer, so I like that.
Yeah,
Um,
100%, 100%.
and it seemed to work out for you. So, yeah, I think I heard some sports there. So, what did you do before you started your career in sales? Was cricket your main passion back then?
Yeah, so after graduating from university, I actually studied sports coaching studies at university, and I worked as a sports coach slash educator within high schools, primary schools, and also universities, and also did some, youth coaching for elite county cricket across the UK. And basically, I did a lot of my coaching badges post graduating from university, and always loved the sport I was very lucky that cricket got to take me to a few cool places like the Caribbean for 3 weeks for a tour playing over there, and then brought me eventually to Australia. So yes, very passionate about the sport, but yeah, it kind of was the first move out of university that then brought me to Australia. So which was very grateful for.
Nice. And then you already said that you started out as an SDR, right? Can you tell us about your early days in sales? How did that start for you when you were in Australia, got to know the SDR role? How did you cope with that?
Yeah, so it was brutal, but I loved it. I think it was definitely a baptism of fire. I worked at a business called Global Data, in 2010, and I was given an opportunity by now a very good friend of mine who was the sales manager back in the day, a guy called Philip Reynolds, who we're still in touch with now and become great friends with. And I had no experience in selling. I was very much a people person, and the role then was very much just cold calling in, getting buyers on the phone, targeting C-level executives and selling them a B2B experience. But back then in 2010, it was SEO basically now, because majority of marketing managers and marketing people were spending money on print, right? So that's sort of showing my age a little bit. And it was right on that innovation point where people were starting to shift their spend more to online and digital. So I got to ride that wave at the time. But I was a very nervous young guy. My voice was a little bit higher, and my confidence wasn't nearly as strong. So there was a lot of great tactics that they taught me then, which I still use today. It's probably one of the best roles I had when you think about it now, going back at it all. So yeah, it was good fun.
Yeah. And looking back from your, like, let's say now you have a manager perspective, you've been a sports coach, a manager, a CRO. When you look at Chris as an SDR back then, how would you coach yourself? What was something, if you think about your younger SDR, if you experience being in one room, how would you give yourself an advice on what to do different or how to think differently about what you do?
Yeah, I think a lot of people always told me to stick to the script, which was always very much the methodology back then. But I think you've just got to use the tools that you're given as an individual. And I think being authentic is one of the best things that I probably would have told myself back then. And sometimes you can leverage the tools that you have and follow the script, but you got to put your personality in there and making sure it's personal to the person on the call. And I think sometimes putting different tones or pace on your first call, and asking for help and support, I think sometimes could be a great way to disarm someone, especially nowadays when first thing they do when they pick up the phone and they hear it's a sales call, XYZ calling from this company, it can sometimes just automatically lead to the hang up button. So yeah, and I think it would also just keep dialing. I think just because someone said no one day, you might have caught them at a bad time, and they definitely won't remember you in 2 to 3 weeks. So just call them again, because if you really believe you've got a product that can help solve some of their problems, you just got to make sure they hear about it, right? So
Yeah. I think this is something that we all experience in sales, right? Sometimes you talk to someone and they are like way off. They don't even want to talk to you. It's like, no, this is not a priority. I'm not even the right person and whatever. And like 3 weeks later, they come through as an MQL from your website and you're like, hey, what's up with this, right?
I think
exactly. We see this so often.
100%, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And I think sometimes, I'll give you an example. I remember I was trying to get a hold of this gentleman for some time, and within that 6 months, I must have called him maybe 4 or 5 times, and eventually he got a promotion after the 6 months. And this is before LinkedIn was really as visible as everyone promoting themselves. And suddenly he was like, oh, actually, this is quite interesting. So sometimes, people's circumstances change. You catch them a different day, maybe, calling at a different time. during the day, you can catch them during different slots. So yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
really, I can see that. I actually have one story to share when I was working as, let's say, a full cycle rep. I was prospecting someone, and I had I think it was like an introduction meeting where it was like 4 or 5 people. We had a demo. I showed them the tool. I was doing everything. That's like 3 years ago, and we were looking at everything, and then everyone in the room was like, "Yes, we really need this. This is absolutely what we need." And then there was one guy from IT that said, like, no way in hell are we going to work in the cloud. So maybe that tells you a bit about my buyer persona back then, but they were like, they were shying away from cloud. So that was the IT guy. And then I think 3 or 6 months later, he actually DM'd my CEO on LinkedIn and wrote him a note like, "Hey, I have a project here. We have to do some digital transformation stuff in our department, and I would really love to see what you guys do." And I was so shocked, right? He was not even remembering that we already had a demo and nothing, right? It was a short sales, like he needed this, and it was like on his agenda, and then it was a complete different person. That's so weird.
Yeah, absolutely. It's bizarre sometimes how things can change pretty quickly. So no, that's another great example, right?
Yeah. And then you said something where it was about your personality on the phone as well, and like tone, pace and stuff. So you said that you would advise yourself not to stick to the script too much, but it's rather about how you say things, right? And how you act on the phone than what you say. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sometimes just, it's okay to project some vulnerability, even if you know what you're doing. Hey, Tyrone, yes, oh, can you help me? Sometimes just putting in, like, a bit like the bumbling granddad kind of thing, having a chat sometimes like that on the phone. It may come across as unprofessional and not like exactly what's happening, but it also sometimes gives the person on the other side that, oh, this person's actually really busy, and you've got some value to give, but at the same time, you've got to try and get through the call where they suddenly start like, well, this is different. And it's starting to hear a little bit of a difference from you just being another person just reading a script. I think that's what I was trying to entail, and asking for help. So yeah.
I really like also like the role of people when they are on the phone and they are maybe new to the SDR role, right? And they don't even know the market yet so good, right? But it's like their first sales call. Then why not even be upfront with it and talk to someone, and when they bring an objection or something, say like, "Hey, to be honest, I'm pretty new to this role. Can you help me explain what you mean?" Right? This is so powerful, absolutely, because people really want to help, right? They want to talk with you, and then they will be sharing. This is way better than someone being on the phone and answering every objection with a technique, and everything you say with a technique, and it always sounds the same, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all humans, right? So until Chat TBT, can come in and take that conversation to another level, But I feel for the SDRs now, like it's a very fast-paced environment. Like, the market is changing so quickly. The way people interact with each other is changing. Sometimes the telephone's not the best means, but we used to call it the cinquante. It was like, first you'd call, then you'd text, then you'd LinkedIn, and there was email. And then, for some of the other guys out there, they would find other platforms to, whether it be WhatsApp or, other applications to get in touch with people. So there was always the fifth one, which everyone was a bit more creative. So, maybe even an old fashioned letter might work these days, but, you can't send it to the office because everyone's working from home, right? So
yeah, it's so weird. Somehow you are trying to call everyone. Somehow you are trying to send written letters. Nothing works. And somehow it still works, right? One channel, exactly. Work, so you just have to do all 100%,
of them. 100%.
Okay,
100%.
Cool. Let's move on in your career a bit. I saw that you moved into a leadership role quite quickly, I would say, in your sales career. Can you share a bit about why you chose that path? I could imagine that something about like being a sports coach already told you how to be a coach, for example. But yeah, share this story with us.
Yeah, great question. I think, just to clarify, I think for me, management and leadership are two things. I think you can be a leader and not be a manager of a team. I think standards are really important, and how you set that. And for me, one of the main reasons why I wanted to become a leader within sales was because I'm very driven around purpose, and creating an impact, not just on myself, but also the team and the people around me. Some might say like a catalyst for change, and always striving to make things better and make things easier. So as a leader, you have to lead from the front, right, and strive, and always to be better. And I've always played like a player coach role, particularly in that first step. And I think also it was also the type of businesses that I worked for. For example, there were companies where it was just me and a founder. It was pre-rev, right? So yes, the job title might be a little bit more senior, but you have to demonstrate those leadership qualities in market, right? So it goes with the territory of going from 1 mil to 10 mil in ARR, and you have to be a stretch higher almost, because a lot of these businesses can't afford that sales director from Salesforce with 15 years experience. So it was a great opportunity for me to take that step, and I find mentoring very rewarding, and I would definitely recommend everyone to be open to sharing, because we can all learn from each other, right? Like I can learn as much from an SDR as an SDR can learn from me. So I think it's incredibly important to create an environment where people are safe, right? So that they can share, mentor, and help grow just as people, right? I think it's important because it's a hard industry, sales, and I think camaraderie is one of the most important things in building relationships with your team. So, but don't get me wrong, I do love to win, and I do love to see others win. So, but it helps. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. No, I can see both sides as well. And
yeah,
maybe you
100%.
shared something that leadership, on the one hand side, like leadership and management are two different things. And then you also just mentioned mentoring is something that is also very of value for you. So can you give like
Yes.
let's say a short definition of these three things, how they are different from your perspective, like mentoring, being a leader, and being a manager? What is different in those three buckets?
Yeah, so I think management it's really important. It's giving clarity to your team. It's giving structure. It's giving it's giving a framework for your team to be successful. And I think making sure that you're continually to make sure it's optimized, right, and managing the operations of it. I think management, making sure everyone's all synced and all heading towards the same vision and the common purpose. That's where it starts to get blurry and starts falling into leadership. And you can 100% be a leader just as an AE or a SDR, by setting your own standards and leading from the front, right, across your own team. And you don't have to have a seniority role. And I think for me that's where the mentoring piece is really important as a leader, because if you can empower those people throughout the hierarchy of the sales organization, it makes management a lot easier as well, because you're all striving to that same common purpose. So, but vision's important. You've got to give and motivation. It's really important towards leadership. So it's a big part of it, right? And I think sometimes management, you have to make really hard decisions, and you have to have those hard conversations. And I think that's that part, that's the other side of the coin, right? So which is something that not everyone likes to do or enjoys doing it, but it's a part and parcel of the role. So yeah.
I see. And then mentoring, how would you say is that different to the other two things?
Yeah, so mentoring, I think, is it's more around it's more giving back and giving opportunity, not necessarily to younger people, but also just to people that are around the organization that want to learn, and they're seeking guidance from people that may have experienced something in particular. I'll give you an example. I used to work with an AE who is actually indigenous Maori from New Zealand, and we started doing a lot of not-for-profit work, in the New Zealand, market, and, to hear his stories and, him mentoring the organization around some of, that Indigenous culture into our Australian business was really inspiring. And I think things like that can sort of fall into the bucket of mentoring as well. So, yeah.
No, yeah, cool. Thanks for making like these three buckets a bit clearer. I think they are all very important, right? And I think when someone is moving on in their career, they can always decide which path they want to go. Because I think sometimes people don't really see how leadership and management is different, right? And that was something that I saw personally in my career, when I went into a SDR management role. And actually what I wanted to do was mentoring, coaching, and leading, but I didn't want to manage at all. And that is something I had to go through this experience to really find that out, because you just said there are some things you have to do that you don't want to do and then that don't feel right to you. And this is like the management piece, right? And then for me, I made the decision that this is not for me at this point, right? I think yes, I want to be a leader. I want to be a coach, and I can also do mentoring, but not managing people. And I think there's something like really different in that. And I think it's always 100%. Good to make that clear to people moving on in their career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and they're all fun. They all have their own different challenges, and I think, that's part and parcel of, as you grow and develop your own career and where you end up, you start to find what your particular skills are and where you want to add value. So I think it's important to understand it, I think, and have, I guess, the self-conscious to know when you're falling into those buckets is really important. Yeah.
You just said that you've been a player coach at the beginning of your, let's say, management and leadership positions. How do you see this working actually? Because from my perspective, I don't like this at all. I have never seen this work in a good way. I always see that it comes to like different priorities and should I make my number or the team number, and all these conversations come up. And so I think from my perspective, it doesn't work so well. But how did you see it, and how do you treat it today?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the definition, right, of what a player coach is. I think for me, yeah, it's all, necessarily having a number, but it's also making sure that, you've got a particularly, how do you say, clarity. You have to have clarity, right? So if you don't have clarity on what your role is, that's when I think things get blurry. I think you can still have a player coach environment where you can lead from the front and help empower your team. But I think it's up to the individual, because there are some people, I don't think they have that same, how do you say, potential awareness, because, it comes back to ultimately what you're getting paid on and what's the comp package. And I think if you're going to be incentivized by hitting your number and not the team, I think that's a different conversation. I think if there's a framework that's set up where there's clear guidelines and clear rules, and I think that's on the coach to set those expectations as they're building out their framework. I think the other thing as well is, working in these smaller technology companies, you kind of have to do it because everyone is in revenue generation mode. And I think, when you've got, you want to promote yourself, you want to take more home, at the end of the day, you've got to ultimately, justify where's that money coming from. And where I would add value would be in particular around very strategic renewals, talking around organic growth within larger accounts, how to structure a commercial agreement that will then benefit the organization, but there would be quite significant deal values there. But at the same time, making sure there was enough to kind of, go around, the AEs and so forth. So it seemed to work quite well for us, but, at those sort of times. I suppose there's always good and bad scenarios to it, but I think it depends on the stage of growth the company is, because that's ultimately sometimes the reality of it, right? Because if you lose a headcount, right, I think that's when, if you're not in that role, sometimes it can, you still got to make up the numbers, right, which have been set by the board and the business. So yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I really understand this. One hand side is like the growth of the growth stage of the company. Can we even invest into a full-time leader, for example, that is not
exactly.
responsible for an own number? And if so, then
100%.
this should be really like communicated clearly. As you said, they need clarity on, am I responsible for my own number or the team number, and which one am I allowed to come short on, right? When stuff hits the fan. So
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's where, have like any executive, and I'd say this is any advice to anyone going to join a startup for the first time. If you're going in as a sales leader role, whether it be, the first sales hire working with founder, or you've got a team of 5, whatever that level is of growth, make sure you have short-term incentives and long-term incentives, and make
mhm,
sure that it's all geared and scaled up towards the organizational, you know, strategic goals, and get it in writing as well, because that's always sometimes where the clarity gets miscommunicated, which I think that's when you start to get challenges with a player coach role, because you'll
mhm,
start going down a path, and you know the definitions might potentially be different from what's
mhm.
actually happening, if that makes sense. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that would be my
100%. Cool.
advice. Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
it. Chris, talk to me a bit about moving from a sales manager role into a CRO role, because I imagine this is a complete other level, and maybe it also depends on the maturity of the company, but I imagine CRO being completely different to being a frontline sales manager. So can you talk to me a bit about how you made this step into the CRO role?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's one that everyone should take with caution. I think, when you've got skills in certain areas and that's your forte, it's making sure you identify where your gaps in knowledge are. And I think for me, one of the biggest reasons why I was able to be so successful in that position was it was the team that I built around me. So I didn't have a marketing background. I hired, very good marketing directors or heads of marketing that would report into me, that specialize in lead generation and understand all these tools, and I'd work with them on the campaigns. But yeah, you're 100% right. It's a very, very different, a different role. But I think it's great if you are going into a CRO position having been a sales professional, because you've got a little bit more of an edge, I think, because you understand how to, get business done, and you understand how to scale, in that environment. So for me, CRO, I was looking after marketing, sales, and everything also post contract signed. So I had a customer success director who would manage teams of customer success managers, and also everything from like professional services as well. So it's getting that framework underneath, and also the right org chart to make sure that you have those people in that role to help make sure that it complements you. But yeah, so it's a big step up. Yeah, and it was definitely one that was not taken lightly. So it was good fun.
Yeah, I believe so. Let's do a quick, I would not say role play, but let's do a quick, a coaching session for me and maybe some other people that hear this, because actually CRO is one of the personas I sell to. And we all have it in our onboarding. We all have it in our knowledge base, right? How to speak to a CRO, which are their priorities and stuff like that. But if I was to approach you as a CRO, how can I imagine your day looking like? So what are your main responsibilities? What do you care about? And what makes you tick when you read a cold email, when you get a cold call? When would you respond and actually take the call?
Yeah. So yeah, when would I take the call? Uh, this actually takes me back to a demo that I had, and I was invited to from my customer success director. I won't name the business, but there was an AE who spent an hour going through the whole platform, and then literally the last 5 minutes was the bit that I was interested in, which was around insights and data. And at the end of the day, as a CRO, you're really, really focused on making sure your customer journey is connected, because you've got one view of customer, right? So particularly in that role that I was looking after, and when you're going through the importance of a technology and the features, at the end of the day, that's why I hire a director of customer success, that I'm empowering them to go find the right software to solution for them day to day. For me, I'm interested in the dashboards. I need to know certain things that are happening when, and I need to know it's happened, in those cadences to make sure that we're driving towards that mission critical objective. So it's all about metrics, and data, and it's one of the fundamentals to be a successful CRO is really understanding the customer and surfacing these insights. And it was something I learned actually in my career quite early on, is if you are pitching to a C-suite, I would almost just flip your demo, start with your dashboard and go backwards. This is the outcome, and then now I'm going to show you how to get there. So are you interested in seeing that and how to get to the outcome? And I think that was, In terms of like answering a cold email, I think inboxes can be, quite daunting. I think, particularly as a CRO, because you are plugged into so many different automations and you are across so many different technology stacks. So, there are a lot of notifications coming through. I'd put a support ticket in. If you really want to get a hold of a CRO, put a support ticket in, because if it's something quirky, it flags straight up in Zendesk or your support thing, and it's something, if you're onto that and you're looking after the customer journey, you'll pick it up, because it's not, hang on, what's this? And I actually got a really good cold inbound email that came through that ended up purchasing the software, because it was pretty clear there was a gap. So based off the way they interacted with me, so it's almost like try and get through to them in a way where a customer would, if that makes sense, because that's what we're looking at. Hopefully that's a bit of advice anyway, but
100%. So I'm already thinking about like putting myself in the shoes of a customer of yours, for example, and then like what would I be struggling with right now? And what would the CRO care about to solve for me as a customer? Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Screenshots, my website, the front door to my business, something broken, and exclamation marks, error, homepage, screenshot. If you're selling that service, that's the way to get a hold of the CRO, I reckon, 100%. It's like, think about it from a customer first approach. Because I mean, that's ultimately what the role is, right? It's for me, a lot of people talk around being customer first and customer centric, but no one talks about how to do it. And a big part of that is really putting yourself in the shoes of the customer and really trying to live and breathe, how they experience the buying process. And I think that's ultimately how you potentially get in front of them. So
cool. I really like that. Thanks for sharing. I will try it this week. Let's see how that works out for me.
Good luck.
So, Chris, after taking all these like management positions and frontline management, then CRO, being responsible for dashboards and analytics and making the whole business, like the whole engine work, you decided now to take an IC role again at Alteryx. And I think this is a bold step to make. I think a lot of people would like miss or think about like missing the prestige that a C-level role comes with, but you decided to take it anyway. So share a bit why you did that.
I think for me, because of having worked within a lot of smaller technology businesses, there's always been a big itch of mine to like go swing a bat in the major leagues, if that makes sense, within big tech. When the opportunity came along to work at a business like Alteryx, projecting to be $1 billion company by the end of this year. The opportunity for growth, not only for myself, but also the team around us here in Australia is very exciting. I think you get to a point in your career where you need to start thinking about where the balance is coming from in terms of what you're learning. And I think, when you're working with founders and you know a lot of IP around how to scale a business like that, it's very rewarding, and you bring that blueprint to multiple companies and you install it and you go. But there's got to be, a stage when you start to think, okay, what's next? And for me, that was Alteryx, and coming in and working with, amazing leaders like our, APJ director, Gary Johnson, and Heidi, who's the managing director here of Australia, and my manager, Jed. These guys, and they've got 20 plus years, 30 years experience, right? And I think as someone who wants to excel and grow into a career, that's where the opportunity came along. And it's really exciting to bring over my skills into this market. It's also the product as well. I think, having done my role, I understand exactly how important data is. And having been a CRO, it ties really well into the Alteryx platform. And I think this is where I can add a lot of value back to the customer base that I'm working with here in Australia. But at the same time, still get to, tick those boxes for me, which gives me purpose, which is problem solving and building, solutions to, challenge these real business outcomes. So it's been a great couple of weeks. This is like week 2. So I've been incredibly, grateful for my onboarding so far. Normally, I have to go down to the shop to pick up my MacBook from Apple on day one when I started in these smaller businesses. But it was great to have an IT team here and get myself all set up. So very very much appreciated to the different styles and the ways that these different businesses operate. So. Yeah, a day in the life as CRO is pretty intense in the startup, right? So especially when you're like bootstrapped and self-funded. So I think for me, leaving a CRO where my whole diary was completely time boxed. So, managing time zones was incredibly difficult in a smaller business where, I was responsible for the growth of the US, London in the UK, European market, obviously Asia Pacific as well. And I think for me, trying to get back time, I think it is really important. I was waking up at, still to this day, I get up at 5:30 every day, but I would have to like massively manage my weeks around time zones. So I had no control over Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays because the evenings were given up to Europe. And then Thursday, Friday, and Saturday mornings here in Australia, I was working US hours. So your weeks become quite long. And I think, especially when, you're hyper focused on growth and, you're doubling the revenue and tripling the revenue, it's really exciting. But for me, taking a step back and really valuing a bit of work-life harmony and finding, a role here at Alteryx where I can add my expertise, but also just be, Chris and really focus on enterprise B2B sales and ultimately help support my family and grow in a new environment. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I really like how this decision ties back to the values that we talked about earlier, because you decided like what is important to me and what do I need with my family now with your newborn baby. So I really like how you made this whole thing fit into your values. And actually that's the note on which we will end today. We are done with the interview. I really enjoyed going through this motion with you, and actually we went a bit off script, but I really liked it. So thanks for sharing your whole story actually and these advice, and also the coaching session. Actually, I think I will write some cold emails now.
Good stuff, Tyro. No, absolute pleasure, and thanks so much. And all I'd say is to anyone listening, please do reach out on LinkedIn. I'm very open to connecting and happy to stay in touch. And if I can add any value in any way, I would love to do so. So.
Awesome. I will put your LinkedIn link into the show notes so everyone can find you. And with that being said, Chris, thanks so much for coming on, and talk to you soon.
Cheers. Thanks so much, guys. See ya.
Bye-bye.